What's going on, guys? Meteorologist Jonathan Kegas with you alongside. Can you hear me, everybody? David, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you.
sweet. Gotcha. Sorry, I thought we lost audio. Sorry about that, guys. Meteorologist Jonathan Kegas with you alongside meteorologist David Nazario. Good to be back with you, my friend.
Absolutely, Jonathan. I couldn't agree more. We have a lot more to talk about tonight than we did last time we met together on Friday night.
Yeah, we do. We have a named storm. We were talking about the potential of this, that the models were biting on some shenanigans as we were talking about kind of the combination of a non-tropical system and a tropical system to now get a fully tropical storm that earlier this morning in the afternoon looked impressive, and we're kind of watching and waiting and seeing these satellite trends. And this is where we're going to start with, David. And we were talking off camera just 10 minutes ago. You pointed out these two little teeny tiny hot towers that are starting to get going right around the center. We'll see what it does with that over the next 30-ish minutes that we're hanging out together, but that could be the start of maybe some rapid intensification going forward.
It could very well, definitely. You can see we have a large gap in our convection and our cloud features. It looks like this system may have ingested some continental dry air off the coastline of Mexico. For those of you who met with me earlier this morning, we were discussing that we have a high mountain chain along the eastern periphery, like a front range, if you will, on the east side of the Mexico coastline. And what I do believe is going on here, and I corroborated this with Jonathan moments before going live with you guys, it does seem like we may have had some downsloping, a little bit of what's called adiabatic warming that goes on as air descends along the lee side of the mountains. This is the only area we could more or less infer where this dry air could have wrapped in around the system. The dry air associated with the stationary boundary to the north and over Texas, the southern plains, is still displaced to the north. And we have some dry air over the western Caribbean, but that does not seem to be playing a heavy role in this center of circulation. Could also be a combination of diurnal minimum. The sun has been up all day. We've had that instability. The rising velocity is displaced around the storm, and we're finally seeing our overnight thunderstorm tops dissipating some, revealing what looks to be the bones, the interior structure of this system. And those two hot towers flaring up, ideally right around that center of circulation, could maybe be a resurgence in convection that this storm needs to further intensify. We've already seen great consolidation throughout the day today, further organization, a little bit faster than our models and even National Hurricane Center was aware of up to this point.
Yeah, and David, hot off the press here while we were talking, we just got the 8 o'clock advisory in, so there are some of the stats, and then we'll show you the track from the 5 o'clock advisory. Correct me if I'm wrong, at 5 we had a 996. Is that correct, millibar low?
That is correct, Jonathan. Yeah, so we have deep in 3 millibars. So despite this almost naked appearance to the south and southeast quadrants of Francine, we are still seeing a bit of deepening going on in the center of circulation. And to put it into comparison for those of you who may be joining us brand spanking new to the Just Weather, didn't catch the Weather Center edition this morning at 10 o'clock, we were sitting somewhere around 1,005 millibars this morning. So you can see, rapid intensification or not, we are intensifying. We have dropped 12 millibars over the last 12, give or take about 14 hours. No, excuse me, 10 hours. 10 hours. If we went and we met at 10 o'clock this morning, so that'd be about 10 hours ago, we saw a decrease in central pressure of about 12 millibars.
So we're going to be watching to see what that happens. I'm going to switch back. I was just looking at some of the comments. Turn Naz's mic up a little bit so that everybody can hear. It was just a little low. But this was one of the interesting things that we saw at 5 o'clock. And I think, we had talked about this and some of the hurricane models, and that's really what you want to look at right now, at least for intensity. You want to look at the mesoscale, allowing the hurricane models like the H4 for the halves A, halves B. They're going to do the best at this point to try to kind of sniff out any kind of rapid intensification. And there's going to be time for that, we think, overnight tonight into tomorrow. But the point we want to make with this one is that you see here that if you were watching earlier today, the Hurricane Center has now upped the forecast to a Category 2 storm and up the wind speeds about 15 miles an hour, sustained to 100 miles an hour, coming in somewhere along the Louisiana coastline at about 1 o'clock, give or take, in the afternoon. And conditions will be deteriorating all the way up to that. But we also have, of course, hurricane warnings in play right across across the coast. We have hurricane watches that are in effect. Inland, that's that shaded area there. We'll play this out further so that I can kind of show off where exactly all those watches and warnings are, David.
Copy that. I'll go ahead and take over for a second. So, folks, to give you a bit of a broad brush of what we're going to be discussing tonight, I have my usual, even though we're here in the studio, I got my usual notations here down below so I don't get kind of lost in the sauce, if you will, as we go through the briefing. Tonight, primarily, what I want to focus on are going to be our short-range impacts. As we all know, with these more or less homegrown systems, albeit Francine is behaving a bit more like a Cabo Verde system, with it intensifying as quick as it has over the last 12 hours. I want us to primarily focus on, for this live stream and into tomorrow, if we have the capabilities of producing another live stream for you guys, talking impacts to the eastern and northeastern portions of Texas, particularly exploring not only the heavy rain and flood potential both on the coast and inland for Louisiana and Mississippi, but as well as a maybe low to mid-end tornado outbreak we could see in the right front quadrant, the dirty side of the system, as it lifts to the north and pulls in a lot of that stagnant warm air, a little bit of that leftover temperature gradient associated with the stationary boundary that more or less spawned its counterpart that sank in from the north and fused with our system overnight to develop such a boisterous circulation in the low to mid levels. Just to kind of give you guys a bit of a SOE, a schedule of events for tonight's briefing.
Yeah, we're going to get into some of that severe weather stuff. We got a lot of cool graphics. I mean, they're cool to look at. Certainly, we don't want to see the impacts from that, but we got a lot of that coming up later in the show. One of the other things that we're watching here, we are tracking the Air Force reconnaissance plane in real time. So as you see the cute little graphic there right at that end, that is where they're hanging out. So they're on the northeast quadrant of this developing eye wall here. And again, that's where we've at least estimated, the Hurricane Center is estimating 993 millibars. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the hurricane hunters are going to find as they're going to be in here for the next couple of hours now.
Absolutely. So we're going to have that running in the background for you guys. And right now, what I'm doing is I'm not particularly looking at the stream window. I know I'm loud and clear. Thankfully, we've adjusted the volume. I'm taking a look at some of our higher resolution model data. So first and foremost, to get it out there into open air, surprisingly, our hurricane models, they did successfully initialize very well. And when I say initialize, we're talking short-range conditions, short-range analysis, and forecast data. Essentially, that means, are they showing the correct intensity of the system, the correct internal structure, the overall layout of our system? Is it capturing that channel of dry air fairly well? And both halves A and B are doing pretty phenomenal for 18 Zulu. Halves A being somewhat of a bit of a dramatic outlier, showing this system curving around the apex of our ridge, that subtropical ridge out there that's positioned over South Florida, spawning a lot of our coverage here in the Sunshine State for our viewing area local to News 6. It's coming across the apex of that ridge and actually dipping in a bit further to the east, well to the east of National Hurricane Center's cone. Halves B has also delineated or deviated from the NHC track just a bit further to the east as well. Still in line with what we briefed to you guys this morning, a landfall between Beaumont and Baton Rouge, looking a little closer to Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And I know we do have some coastal mandatory evacuations underway as we speak, which is an excellent call on their part. I do think we have not seen the full extent of how far to the east or how far of a curve this system will have. It's looking a little less likely it'll simply curve north-northeast and punch straight into central Louisiana. We could see a bit more of that clockwise spin rounding the apex of that subtropical ridge and getting a little further off towards the east than initially anticipated. We're still exploring that. Obviously, this is 18Z. We're getting that fresh recon data in as we speak, and hopefully if the planes can wrap up their current missions, we'll get that in for the 0Z update, have that for you guys first thing tomorrow morning. It also does look like, according to our HAFS models and some of the high-res model, the RRFs, the RRFS, the HRRR, conditions for Louisiana in particular will start to go downhill as early as first thing Wednesday morning. We'll already start to see some of that thunderstorm and shower activity working its way into the coastline, some potential supercellular activity as we go through max heating of the day that day on Wednesday. So the tornado threat will already start to go up as we get into the mid to late afternoon hours of Wednesday, and then just continue overnight Thursday as this system moves further inland. What I've also been exploring alongside Jonathan here in the Weather Center at News 6 is that leftover stationary boundary and the shear that's been brought on by the jet that's just been more or less hanging out, pretty much running parallel to the Gulf coastline. We also have a short wave that's coming in, a short wave trough that's currently working its way through the desert southwest. Arizona, New Mexico, this is expected to meet up with then Hurricane Francine. And these variables put together should give us almost like a pseudo warm sector on the leading right front edge of this system. And that's why a few other big sources in the weather community are also in agreement that Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Slidell, Gulfport, even a little further into interior parts of Mississippi could see a localized tornado outbreak. Very similar to what we saw with Beryl, very similar mechanisms. We have that jet, the difluent quadrant at ahead of the trough that's digging in out of the four corners of desert southwest. And that's definitely going to help to ramp up the water spouts moving inland, making landfall, transitioning to tornadoes, the river and lake effect that these circulations may have. So we're looking at kind of a mixed bag of impacts. We're definitely exploring the surge threat. We're looking at anywhere between 5 to 10 feet of surge, especially closest to that onshore flow on the east side of this system. We're definitely going to be monitoring how much water gets pushed inland towards Lake Pontchartrain as we see that favorable wind direction out of the east for pretty much the duration of this system, especially as it's on approach to its landfall. So flood threat is definitely going to be very elevated with this system. We're going to have to further inspect how strong it gets on approach. 18Z data suggests we're looking at a mid-grade, possibly high-end Cat 2 as a ceiling for Francine right now. We're going to see how it does overnight, mixing out that dry air. I'm going to take a quick glance at our satellite image here on my end of the spectrum real quick, just see what those hot towers are doing. Still slow to progress, but if we see this system take full advantage of the diurnal maximum and get that thunderstorm coverage back in full swing, we definitely could have a hurricane here within the next 3 to 6 hours.
Yeah, I mean, we're already at, 65 miles an hour, so it's not going to take much to put this thing over the top. We just have to fend off the dry air. And, of course, we are not rooting for it. We're rooting for something to happen like what it did with Ernesto. It's very, very hard for these things to kind of clean out the drier air once it gets in. They need to be really chugging along. And there was just a little bit of drier air that Ernesto got in, and it prevented it getting to major hurricane status. So that is one of the things that we are going to watch for. David was kind of going over the timeline a little bit. So I want to kind of show you how this could play out and go into fruition. So this is going to be Tuesday during the day, during the morning. So this is 11 o'clock. Note, and this is exactly what David was just talking about. Center's still way down here. It's strengthening. It's eating up all the energy that the Gulf has given it. But look at the heavy rain coming through. Would not be surprised if we pop some strong storms out of that. But it's going to be in here, and in here, where as it gets closer to land, that thing could unravel and then really bring the tornado threat, and then that gets even worse as we get into Tuesday evening, and then eventually as we approach landfall sometime during likely Wednesday afternoon. But again, really Tuesday night into Wednesday, we are really starting to watch the conditions go downhill a little bit. Just look at the heavy rain from Beaumont, just to the east of Houston, right along the Louisiana coastline, pretty much all of Louisiana in this, Lake Charles, into DeRidder, Port Arthur, Lafayette, Baton Rouge, New Orleans. We're going to have to be talking about some of the surge coming in on the southern side of Lake Pontchartrain. And then it's all these itty-bitty guys, all these kidney bean-shaped things right here. Those are going to be supercell thunderstorms within the feeder bands, within the outer bands of the storm, which we're going to have to watch, as David mentioned, for some tornadic activity. So while we continue to go forward, I want to pull in some comments here, see how we're doing. Let's see, somebody, April with the great comment here. So it was awesome last live chat, and this is something that we were going to get into before or later on in the show. That 6 for 6. That's hard to do. I'd have to go back and look at recorded history. I'm pretty sure the streak, I don't know the longest streak, but I know back in 2020, I think once we got deeper into the storm, we had the streak of hitting it. One of the things that we said here at News 6, obviously, like the forecasts were crazy earlier in the year, and obviously we're running a little bit behind schedule on those super intense forecasts. The deal with this is that, though, we called it more impact. than the hyperactive or the explosive, as others called it. It was going to be more impactful season. That was the one thing, David, and we touched on this at the end of the last live chat, that it really was screaming that we were going to have much more land interaction this time around than last year. Last year, during an El Nino, a typical quiet year, we had, 23 named storms? It was nuts last year. Most of them were out to sea, so everyone was like, oh, it's quiet. Well, it wasn't quiet. It just wasn't impactful.
Exactly. To touch on that, or to piggyback off that statement, to put it into perspective for any new viewers who may not be familiar with the Weather Center, Nazario, my specific page until taking this position, to put it into perspective, the ratio, 2023, we had 21 total storms. We went back and had a postseason analysis and had a no-named storm back in January. Either way, that did not play a role in anyone's weather, whether you be an island of the Caribbean, Bermuda, Atlantic Canada, etc., you name it. We had 21 overall storms last year, and we only had one hurricane make landfall, Major Hurricane Idalia in the Big Bend of Florida. To put it into perspective, as April has already alluded to, big shout out to April, longtime viewer, love having her in the chat, always putting in the heavy hitter questions in the comments in the chat. We are 6 for 6, and this will be our fourth hurricane, correct? Or is this the third? We had Beryl, Debbie, or this is the fourth.
Yes.
The fourth.
Yep. So yeah, and that's one of the things here that is going to likely verify. And again, we're going to. This is kind of like a tease to the end. David was looking up some long range stuff to see if this was kind of like the kickstart. All that's. Hold on. I'm just gonna. I saw a comment. Just gonna have to pull it over. There it is. It's just a Category 2 storm. If you know anything about the North Gulf Coast, we are extremely susceptible to storm surge. The way that the Gulf of Mexico comes in, the Gulf side, it is terrible. Talk to me come Thursday morning if you live in the path. Obviously, we're not hoping for that, but this thing could come in as a mid to high end Cat 2. Major is a possibility depending upon how it kind of shakes out the drier air tonight. But that's the one thing that we always preach. Each storm is different. Each has its own personality. I think, talk to the people from Houston that might be on this chat that said Beryl it's only a Cat 1. There's still big-time damage from that hurricane.
Exactly. It's definitely, we don't want to scoff at any of these systems. They're all unique in their own way. And again, respect to every single one of these systems, regardless of where you are and who it's impacting. Jonathan, is there any way we could pull up something I have on my other screen, my adjacent screen here? I wanted to show a graphic to the viewers real quick to kind of depict exactly where it is we could see our greatest waterspout and tornado potential as we go through late Wednesday and into Thursday.
Let me see. I don't know that I can pull over that screen share. But if you want to hop on out of your chair and put it on the other thing so I can pull it over, if it's easy to do, we can do that. We can kind of go forward, and I'll show some of the things so we can pull that over for you.
So yeah, if you want, you can go over to the College of DuPage, and they have a beautiful Theta E overlay for the NAM Nest, or the 3-kilometer NAM, and I'm using the Southeast AOY, the Southeast map that shows East Texas all the way to the Southeast United States, South and North Carolina, and so on and so forth. I just wanted to kind of give a really colorful and almost nice to look at, easy on the eyes, visual representation of where it is we're going to be watching for that tornadic potential, as well as the bit of a hybrid level event that we're going to be seeing as this system mixes in with that dry air that's still situated over the southern plains, the southeast U.S., remnants of our frontal boundary that are just still hanging out there. It's been stationary for an extended period of time. Why initially we didn't think this feature had a fighting chance of developing into anything more than slop, let alone a hurricane. And now we're exploring the potential for major hurricane-style impacts along the coast. And that's another thing, too. While Jonathan's working on pulling up that overlay, just to give you guys a heads up, it is just a Category 2 but we need to keep into account that these are sustained winds that we're forecasting and that National Hurricane Center is projecting right along the immediate Gulf coastline as this system arrives in southern Louisiana. We're still going to have gusts and stronger convective bursts producing winds in excess of 110, 115 plus miles an hour in that center of circulation, especially in the right front of that core of strongest thunderstorms. So you will feel reminiscent of a major hurricane making landfall, especially if we do see a bit of additional symmetry pulled in with this storm. Excellent. So this is the Theta E, guys. All you need to know about this is the yellows and the greens that are up over the United States are going to be your drier air. Look down over the Gulf at those pinks, the magentas, and the whites. That's your tropical moist air. And notice as Francine comes up, as soon as it comes inland over Louisiana, go ahead and, Jonathan, pause it as the storm center is pretty much level with Baton Rouge as it's sitting over land. So as you guys can see, as it comes ashore, we very quickly lose that symmetrical, totally wrapped around perfect circle of a tropical cyclone. Notice here now we have some dry air, that cooler, drier air working its way in across the greater Louisiana area. We're pulling in bits of environment, if you will, from Texas, but we also have that surge of really robust, unstable tropical moisture coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. So right in that general area on the right side of the storm, that's why I wanted to pull this up. It's excellent for even the most simplest of viewers who have no, weather background. And sometimes I can go a little over the top with explaining where you see those pinks coming ashore and that sudden transition from southerly flow to due easterly flow right along the Mississippi-Louisiana border down there, the boot. That's where we're going to see those supercells really kicking off. And I do believe, Jonathan, confirm for me in Zulu time, do the quick conversion to local time. This is probably late in the afternoon, early evening time, yes?
Yep, this is 0Z. This is 2Z, so this is going to be, let's see, going back to Central Time, so about 9 o'clock Central.
Okay, so then, yeah, we're probably going to see a bit of a nocturnal bleed over effect for those tornadoes. I thought this would be a wonderful graphic to pull up for you guys to see that the tornado risk is going to be confined to the east side of this system. But notice as you go through the loop, this is the tail end, you can see that little ridge, that Theta E ridge pulling back to the center of the storm as it crosses from Louisiana into Mississippi. That's where your tornado risk is only going to expand as the system modifies through land interaction. We get a little bit of that additional friction brought on by the land mass. We're going into, unfortunately, I'm going to say the word because in this case it applies, we're going, unfortunately, into a major metropolitan area. So naturally, that urban setting is also going to create a bit of additional turbulent mixing, just like we saw with Beryl, whereabouts we saw the tornadoes on the north and east side popping off as that system moved further inland. We're going to have the same mechanisms in place. So I would not be surprised if Storm Prediction Center is on the money and on the ball with issuing tornado watches as this system gets closer to landfall.
So I want to bring over this comment, Abby. There's a lot of talks in the chat about Beryl being wrong, and I guess I would like you guys to elaborate on that because I assume that you guys are talking about that western jog into Mexico. One of the things here is that I think Houston was always in play. I know, David, you were talking about this. This is while we talked prior to you coming on the New Six team. And there were those ensembles and the icon model that were forecasting that northerly shift. And we were talking about that you always have to respect every single ensemble there. And it just looked weird given the steering mechanisms that was going to go due west. So I would just caution you, just be careful with when you say that they didn't predict Hurricane Beryl completely right, because some people did get that northerly jog correct, and there were a lot of the halves B did very well with it. The icon model did very well with it, and there were a lot of folks saying that it was going to go much further north than that was as well. Baton Rouge, we have a question. Let's see. And then this Houston Media HD says it only takes one. Got it. She says local Houston news. There you go. Shout out to David
Rebecca.
again.
April, thank you very much for that. I was just going to mention that. So, to kind of supplement what Jonathan is saying about local networks, personally, before taking this position as a more official role and presenter for you guys, I felt there were a lot of critical pieces with Beryl that were dropped, that fell at the wayside. First and foremost, a lot of our global models, except the icon, poorly initialized Beryl's center of circulation, the symmetry, and the intensity, which plays a critical role in the overall forecast that you're presented with whatever model you're using. That's another thing too. There were a lot of folks fixating on one or two individual model runs, one or two individual ensemble suites. Exactly. And there were a lot of ensemble runs, a lot of global models outside of the hurricane models. The hurricane models, when they got their reconnaissance data, they immediately shifted, just as we've seen with Francine, and they started to accommodate for that latitudinal jog towards the north, closer to the northern tip of the Yucatan. Even there was one run where the H-Wharf had it missing the Yucatan altogether. Thankfully, that didn't verify. We may have had a whole different beast in the Gulf of Mexico. But regardless, when it comes to forecasting these tropical cyclones, for my Weather Center viewers out there, you've seen me say it time and time again. We got to get a couple of additional model cycles, and we need to build some consistency, build some convergence. And there were a lot of times where we hyperfixated on one or two model runs, and the initial conditions, the short-range forecast from a lot of our long models, the Euro, the GFS, the Canadian, were coming in extremely weak, showing a tropical storm in the Caribbean. We had a Category 5, and that is going to more or less throw the entire solution out the window.
Absolutely. We had a question before about, are there any tropical warnings out for Houston? In the metro area, no, but some of the suburbs to the east, including Galveston, we are in a tropical storm watch. And that's to account for some of the wobbles somebody had mentioned before in the chat. I'm trying to find it if I can. Just about how much wiggle room there is for this thing to move. And I mean, the answer to that is there's still margin for error. And that's one of the reasons why we have the forecasting tool called the cone. And we'll take a look at the official forecast right now, again, from the National Hurricane Center. So what this is basically saying is the center of the storm could go anywhere from here to here to here. That's why there's kind of the uncertainty there as to, for the wobbles and for the steering currents. And as we continue to get more Hurricane Hunter missions into this storm, we're going to know more. I know there was another comment here when we were showing the Hurricane Hunter zigzag. Somebody asked, I thought they were sampling the high pressure. And the answer to that is they were. Gonzo was up, the other NOAA plane. So this is the Air Force that's in there right now. But Gonzo, the little jet that was flying about 40,000 feet up, to sample the steering current. So we've got a plane in there now in the meat and potatoes of the thing, and then we had the little jet out there earlier sampling the steering currents.
Jonathan, do me a favor right now. There's a wonderful comment in the chat brought to us by Rebecca Montague. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that, but she makes a very, very valid point.
Okay.
Says, people on the Gulf Coast should stay prepared throughout hurricane season. Absolutely. Because we just don't know how rapidly a situation like this could evolve, let alone when a storm can take on a totally different characteristic about itself. Whereas couple days ago, and I wholeheartedly apologize for this, the synoptic setup and the models really didn't concur at all with anything reminiscent of a hurricane. But we've seen that this system has played the excellent game of tropical chess, and it's managed to find itself in a play-by-play that allows it to exploit the environment more to its advantage. The disadvantage to us on the immediate Gulf coastline, because anything close to home gives you such a short duration to make those preparations if you aren't prepared. So Rebecca, quality comment. Thank you for putting that in the chat tonight. Everybody, regardless of how quiet, how boring it may be, always be prepared, because the infamous analogy, hashtag it only takes one. And then you're caught holding the bag because, shucks, now it's mass hysteria because your local YouTube source is hyping a Cat 5. May not be that strong, but the general public are going to go freaking out because they weren't taking the entire season serious. You know, if you live along the coast, particularly in a hurricane-prone area, it's more bound to happen than not, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. And Taz Gaming is asking, why is Baton Rouge not on a hurricane watch or tropical warning? So you guys are actually in a tropical storm watch, meaning that tropical storm conditions are expected within the next, or are possible within the next 48 hours. So you guys are in a watch that will likely turn into a warning. I presume that you're not in a warning because there's still that wiggle room for the storm to either go, let me get the telestration back on, to go out toward closer to Beaumont or closer to New Orleans. So that's going to take the tropical storm conditions one way or the other. So there is still some wiggle room in there as well.
100%. And for the folks, while Jonathan's pulling all that up, for the folks asking about steering, because I've been looking at a couple of other unofficial sources out there, and they're just kind of spitballing where this system is going to go. We are fairly confident at this point that it is likely to be a Louisiana type setup, and there could be some subtle jogs to the east that have yet to conclude. So Jonathan's running us through the graphic right now, and there's a little bit more going on here than what meets the eye. We have our spaghetti plots here indicating a central Louisiana landfall. We have our subtropical high height center positioned over the western Caribbean that's driving this system north currently. But again, earlier in the live stream I'd mentioned we also have a major shortwave trough, a little trough of cooler dry air coming over the southern Rockies that's going to also interact with this feature as well. If you look at the color shading here that Jonathan's showing us, we also have a very weird situation called a Rex block over the eastern United States that's trying to establish itself. So the system is going to want to punch through that high height center that's up over the Great Lakes, the high height center that's down over the southeast, the Caribbean, the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and try to squeeze somewhere in between St. Louis, Atlanta, Houston, just using a couple of the city locations on the chart right here. So this system is going to continue off towards the north predominantly, and we could see it start to take that clockwise spin towards the right. Don't really foresee this going any further west. We have that shortwave coming in. We have our pattern setting up over the eastern United States. That's why it's critical and pivotal to look at the big picture before shrinking down in and honing in on your storm, because from almost a global perspective, features that are occurring up over Canada all the way down to Central America could influence what Francine does. And if I had to give you my best guess, ladies and gentlemen, right now, looking at that pattern, definitely going to be a Louisiana situation. It's almost unavoidable at this point. And then from there, it's just a matter of what that subtropical ridge over the southeast does. If it broadens and flattens out as that shortwave comes in, could see it nudged a little bit further to the east. Our models are in a fair bit of agreement. It's going to lift up through that path of least resistance. But regardless, at this point, Houston, you should stay on the weaker side of the system. Texas, you're going to see some outer banding. You're going to see some localized heavy rainfall with some of our stronger thunderstorms that are wrapping around the backside of this system. But luckily, the majority of Texas should stay on the weak side of this system and predominantly an offshore flow. So coastal flooding shouldn't be as major of an issue as for our folks out there in Louisiana, even Mississippi, getting into the coastline of Alabama, even as this features on approach. Obviously not as intense as near our landfall site, but it's very critical we watch from the large perspective before shrinking down in on specific cities and locations.
Yeah, that's right. And it's just, I mean, at this point of the game, you got to just make sure, I guess you're watching the right people, and you're following the right models right now. Intensity wise, you don't want to really look at the global stuff. Hurricane models are going to do much better at this time, trying to sniff out some of the rapid intensification possibilities. And while we're on that topic, by the way, the hurricane hunters actually had a drop zone that found the 993. So that is a ground or I guess air confirmation from the hurricane hunters that we have seen it go to 993.
Oh, I do see that here. Yeah, looking at the recon aircraft observations, 993 millibars closest to the center of circulation with one of the more recent drop zones. So this system is steadily intensifying, and I believe National Hurricane Center does anticipate Hurricane Francine, the upgrade coming somewhere between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. Central Daylight Time, or I should say 10 p.m., 1 a.m. Central Daylight Time. I'm still converting over to Eastern Daylight Time for us here in the Southeast viewing this. So we're going to have to give it a little bit longer. I know that's silly. There's a lot of funnies out there on the social media weather sphere talking about give it another this, give it another that for the hurricane season. In this case, looking at the satellite shot that's up right now, we do still have a pretty opportune window for this system to not necessarily weaken, but not find that rapid intensification window with all that dry air channeling into the center. It's giving it a very distorted and asymmetrical look. We're very north and east side loaded. I know we have a lot of thunderstorms and showers off to the west, but if you look at our strongest banding, it is to the north and to the east with an exposed east corridor on the east side of the system.
Yeah, and watch
so that is working in our favor.
Watch the greens kind of go away here. So we had this big, almost beautiful looking thing, and I say that in a non-understanding, from a satellite perspective, not what it could end up doing. But now it just looks discombobulated, as David was mentioning, where you see the green turn to white. That's the drier air kind of being ingested. It is our hope that there was enough dry air getting in there that when the thunderstorms try to go up, as we just saw over the last couple of hours, those two green dots towards the center of your screen, that they kind of entrain that drier air and choke it out, and then it'll keep it on the weaker side going forward. With that said, overnight tonight, and then through the day tomorrow, through about Wednesday morning, David, about 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, that's going to be its window. If it is going to grow up and get big and strong, that's going to be it, because then it is going to face some adversity as it closes in on the coast a little bit. Maybe not weakening it, but at least stopping its intensification.
Correct. Yes, Jonathan. If this thing can regain its symmetry, then we do have a decent shot at seeing more rapid intensification. And I'm not saying it in the textbook rapid intensification. I just mean faster rate with which it strengthens. Not saying it's going to undergo any kind of explosive development, but we still need to wall off the center. And the longer it takes to modify out and clear that corridor of dry air, the better it is for us, because that means it will not be nearly as strong on its approach towards Louisiana. And I do see a couple folks in the chat mentioning Beaumont, Houston, Galveston area. You're not in the clear. Remember that. That's not what we're saying here. But if the trends to the north and east continue, you will be on the weaker side of the system. And I'll tell you right now, through personal experience, I'm sure Jonathan can attest to this, we do have our wind graphics. We do have that black and light diagram that National Hurricane Center puts out in terms of where the wind fields are. Those 9 times out of 10 are a little overzealous in their coverage. You're not always going to get the tropical storm force winds. You're not always going to get the hurricane force winds. And if we can keep you on that weaker side, your impacts will be fairly limited. It does not mean you will not feel a tropical cyclone somewhere out in the vicinity, but you will likely see a lot less that Francine has to offer on approach to your area, and especially Louisiana.
And there's kind of that wind field in real time. And again, we have the hurricane hunters up there now, and they've been sampling to kind of get the tropical storm force winds. So you see actually land is being impacted right now by tropical storm force winds almost up to the Texas border. You see just south of Brownsville in the parts of eastern Mexico, they are observing tropical storm conditions. So again, pretty wide wind field there as we see it. I want to show you again, too, in case you guys are just joining. David talked a lot about the supercell potential, so we can kind of look at the rotation tracks again. And this isn't going to be exact where they are, but it just kind of paints the picture that each one of these little lines that you see where the gray and blue pop up anywhere east of Lake Charles, New Iberia, Baton Rouge, and then through Gulfport, maybe even as far to the east as Pensacola. That's where we could have some of these supercell thunderstorms featured in the outer bands working their way through. And again, that's going to be Wednesday afternoon. So right as we're dealing with landfall, and then look at this, it gets even more intense. And David was showing this with the Theta E, with all of that tropical moisture comes in, it meets the instability from the heating of the day, and pretty much at the time you don't want it to come in right at the end of peak heating. Look at all these rotation tracks through north central Louisiana, north of Alexandria. So it's going to be interesting to see Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock, if we do have some tornadic storms in north central Louisiana, and then also working their way to the east, New Orleans, Gulfport, Mobile, Biloxi, Pensacola even. You see even into Alabama, southwest of Montgomery, right along the Georgia-Alabama line, or the Florida-Alabama line, I should say. So that's the point, to kind of go back to that. It's only a cat whatever. All these different kind of hazards. And I wanted to show you really quickly, too. We showed you before the Hurricane Center storm surge. The Hurricane Center always forecast in the worst case scenario, but this storm surge here, exclusive storm surge model, gives gives what it actually thinks is going to happen. And you see here just on the right around Morgan City area, and then just right along the Louisiana coast, of course, right along the Gulf of Mexico, that is where we have storm surge of about 9 to 12 feet. So again, that's some big time storm surge closing in on Franklin and Patterson. We're talking more like 3 to 6 feet. And then here we go. This is what we're going to be watching for sure. Lake Pontchartrain, of course. Manville, look at that 3 to 6 foot storm surge. So if you live on the north side of Lake Pontchartrain as well, the wind's going like this. And again, this is not going to be another Katrina. Let me just, okay, but I'm going to say that name just because, remember, Katrina came in over here, and we had the winds on Pontchartrain coming from the north. And that's where we had the issues in New Orleans. We will have stuff coming up from the south, though, so it's going to be important to make sure that you're preparing for that.
Fully agree. We have somebody in the chat who's asking about potential major hurricane status. So we are exploring that. We're actively exploring that. There have been a few model runs that do try to squeak into that Category 3 threshold. Right now, it's still a little too early to tell. Again, we need to see this system organize or remain the same. Right now, the status quo does not suggest a major hurricane if we hold this bony-like structure that we're seeing on satellite right now. If we can't get that core to consolidate for those thunderstorms to really engulf the center, to get that core of strongest thunderstorms around the eye and the eye wall to rebuild that feature that it was trying to get going earlier, we're not going to be able to make Category 3 status, which is a good thing. We do not want to wake up tomorrow morning and see this thing blowing up like we saw this morning. I do believe the overnight thunderstorms we had fire off during the early mid-morning hours of today into sunrise are what's responsible for the fact that we have a fairly decent and symmetrical cyclone on satellite imagery right in front of our faces. Right now, we're not seeing that just yet, and it looks like those two hot towers that formed up just to the immediate south of where that low-level circulation is don't seem to quite do it just yet. We're obviously going to have to give it a little bit more time, and we wake up tomorrow and see what this system looks like throughout the day tomorrow. That'll give us a better representation of what to expect on the coastline as to whether or not major hurricane status will be met. I don't see that being a realistic upper echelon ceiling. I'm still looking, and I know Jonathan as well. We both talked about this behind the scenes. Mid to high end Category 2 if this system does regain its overall organization on approach. But again, regardless of intensity, after showing you guys that supercell parameter and looking at the actual helicity tracks, it goes without saying that Louisiana and Mississippi are definitely going to have to be on the ball with watching for their local tornado warnings. You're going to have to pay very close attention to that, looking at the HRRR, the NAM 3 kilometer. All of our high-resolution models that do go out that far show that that waterspout and inland tornado threat could begin as we're starting the day on Wednesday and continue through into Thursday, especially as that system begins to transition from fully tropical to extratropical. That's when we're going to have very similar ingredients to that of some of our severe weather producers that we had winter time this year and end of last year, thanks to our El Nino pattern kind of shaping up down there.
So I want to throw up the halves B for you, just to show one more thing, and then we'll kind of wrap it up on the long range and all that stuff. I'd love to see this too. I'm all for that, face diaper for sure. But nonetheless,
steel cage match.
it's a bit extreme. Now, so anyway, that's the halves B sliding through. The intensity on this one is coming in real hot. If we do that, we're like you were saying, and again, we're saying it has to look better in terms of the storm. We want it to continue to look ragged like this. Like, let's be clear about that. We love when it looks ragged like that, and it's sucking up some drier air. So thank you, Mexico. But I think it really has to have a very, very good D min or D max overnight. I always go the opposite. Overnight, David.
No, and you're right. We're going to have to keep a close eye on what happens early morning tomorrow. Our HAFS A and B models and the H-Wharf to an extent. The H-Wharf did come in a little bit stronger this model run. It's actually got it at 991 millibars, so close. After getting the latest recon data, we are close to initializing properly. However, the H-Wharf is not successfully capturing the full extent of that dry air channel on the right-hand side. The worrisome factor here is the HAFS B is indeed picking up on a large amount of dry air, pretty much smothering the right side of this system. However, the latest HAFS B, and I really want to see what Zero Z has in store for us here in the next couple of hours with that fresh reconnaissance data, not only sampling the local environment, but the system itself. The HAFS B is thinking, as we get beyond 2 and 5 a.m. local time, we will see a much more symmetrical Francine, and that's when we will start to begin that deepening process a little bit more extensively than the now couple of millibars that we've gone every 3 hours. Still fairly impressive. We don't want to scoff at this storm whatsoever. The fact that we've managed to go down 10 to 12 millibars over the last 12 hours goes to show that this system is trying to overachieve, and if it continues to do so, then I can only imagine that the mandatory evacuations that are already in effect for Louisiana will exponentially increase to get you folks out of harm's way.
And it's I'm glad you mentioned that about some of the stuff with Beryl or with Francine and overachieving. Talk about Beryl. This was one of the reason why these forecasts were so insane early on, because Beryl defied a lot of things. It did things that no other June storm did. It got stronger than no other storm did in that part of the world for that time of the year. And it was a head scratcher thing. This is such a weird storm in the way that it was born that, again, it's another, okay, why is this going on? And yes, I realize that we're behind some of those very hyperactive forecasts and the extreme forecast. There's been a lid on the Atlantic. There's been something holding it back. There's a lot of different theories as to why. Again, it's a good thing, but I think this is the prime example of quality versus quantity, where last year we had the quantity. We had a lot of storms. A lot of them looked kind of ragged until the end, and we're thankfully way out at sea. Now we're talking about storms, unfortunately, impacting closer to land. David, as we get ready to wrap things up here in the next few minutes, I know that you have some thoughts on the longer range stuff too, and I wanted to start that by kind of just showing off the Hurricane Center official blob outlook, if you will, that we have 2 more tropical waves, and actually like a third one here, if my telestrator will work, that's kind of not highlighted. It's kind of weak. It's kind of missing some convection, but it looked a little healthier earlier on. But there's number 2, and then there's that one.
Absolutely, and that's exactly how we'll kind of segue into the outro. Just to plug you guys in before the conclusion, before we cut the live stream, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please make sure to drop them in the comment section upon the conclusion of this live stream. We will get back to you at our earliest convenience. Obviously, it's 8:47 here local in Central Florida. We're going to continue to dig back into the satellite, back into the radar, back into some of the model data, and watch the reconnaissance mission go forward. But yes, looking at the next 7 days, especially our red zone out there just to the immediate southwest of the Cabo Verdes, we could be looking at Gordon forming up over the next 5 to 7 days. Some of our models are still a little iffy on that upstream or that downstream system further off towards the west. Thankfully, both of these are not likely to play a role in anyone's weather. It looks like we will miss the Lesser Antilles to the north, U.S., British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico. This all should lift to the north thanks to what's influencing the track of Francine, currently pulling it north and then eventually northeast. All that low pressure that's kind of breaking down the mid-latitude pattern over the North Atlantic should give these systems an opportunity to lift up and away and may not even play a role in Bermuda's weather. What we're also looking at is our next more or less optimal time frame for the Atlantic Basin to try to make an attempt at producing not only Gordon, but Joyce and maybe Kirk on the immediate horizon. Looking at the very tail end of September between the 25th to the 30th, And then rolling forward into October, the first 2 weeks, we're not only going to have to watch for another stray occasional easterly wave off of Africa, but it does seem like the pattern that's building Francine could maybe produce another homegrown circulation that a few of our ensembles in the long range are pinging on. Not looking at any kind of gratuitous or generous support, nothing confident or confirmed, and we're probably going to see a lot of fluctuation since we're so far out in time, but that's what us meteorologists look for. We look for those little breadcrumbs in the pattern, the ghosts in the machine, if you will, kind of giving you a little tap on the shoulder of pay attention here after you're done fixating on what's happening currently. So that's where we're going to be tracking. I have a couple of other AOIs, thankfully, that shouldn't do much more than contribute a little bit of good ace to the hurricane season. And I can say good because we just kind of get to watch and observe as they spin out into the Atlantic. Shouldn't do much to anybody outside of shipping interest. And, unfortunately, the fish are going to have some rough seas to look forward to. Maybe get some of the surfers and the Disney movies you guys are familiar with. But after that, end of this month and into October, my instincts are telling me we're going to have to transition back to the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico to see what might try to manifest itself if we don't get another wave or two that is healthy enough to survive its trek across the eastern and central Atlantic MDR.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have to look there. Climatology would suggest that. We also have the MJO coming back into play. We talk about it a lot on this channel and a lot on News 6 if you're in the Central Florida area. And by the way, we're coming at you live on News 6 Plus, the Just Weather channel, and clickorlando.com for our weekly edition of Tropics Watch Live. But we talk about it just so much. In order to use these models in these ensembles, as what David was just breaking down for you, we always say, of course, take them with a grain of salt, but whenever you can see what they're biting onto, like the large-scale features of the Central American gyre coming back, or the MJO phase becoming positive to give it that oomph again, that's when you can add a little more credibility to not who's going to be impacted with certainty per se, but okay, we're going to be watching the Western Caribbean, Southern Gulf, extreme Southwest Atlantic by the 3rd or 4th week of September. That's what these things can do, and it does appear likely that we're heading in that direction, if that all makes sense.
No, it definitely does. And to conclude, without going on another long-winded spiel for you guys, the MJO and those Kelvin waves that I've briefed you guys on and the highest points of the atmosphere are what are forecast. Keyword forecast. We've had a lot of snags and a lot of hang-ups this hurricane season, but they are forecast to come through end of this month and especially into the first half of October as we start prepping for full-fledged spooky season, one of my favorite parts of the year. So unfortunately, it looks like we could still see a few tropical cyclones to ring in the month of October even as we get ready for the holiday season altogether to start coming in full force. We are not done with the hurricane season. Probably not going to verify that H active forecast. You guys know how much I don't like that H term thrown around as much as it has been, but does not mean the season's over, as Francine is teaching us a valuable lesson, and it does seem like, based on the track record of 2024, we will likely fulfill another landfall or two, unfortunately.
That's what it looks like. And just real quick, we're getting a lot of questions about Galveston and Houston, so want to kind of touch on that and show this future radar on the high resolution one more time. And by the way, if you're new to the channel, or if you're new to seeing Nazario, hit that subscribe button. I've got his channel marked in there as well. Hit that subscribe button on the Just Weather channel as well. This is how we break it down, just to go on a little bit of a tangent. We don't just show you a crazy model run. We're going to tell you, okay, how is it initializing? That's the key part. You don't get that on every channel. You just get a very, very hypey model run just for clicks, and you're not going to find that with either one of us. We are extremely passionate about that. So with that said, here is 11 o'clock on Tuesday, and you do see some of those outer bands coming into Houston, Galveston. Certainly some storm surge is going to be possible there as well, even though the center is going to stay offshore. Now, there we go. Wednesday morning, some super, super heavy rain coming into Houston, coming into Galveston, even though the center is way offshore, and then things start to get a little better. So, again, somebody mentioned before, like, okay, Houston's getting nothing. That's not the case. Some gusty weather, tropical storm watches are in play for Galveston and then just southeast of the Houston metro. And, of course, those can be changed depending upon where this thing goes. I think this model is doing a pretty good job. This is our in-house model that does very, very good with systems in the Gulf, and it has it right here. There is some opportunity for it to get a little bit closer to New Orleans. Like David mentioned, I think the door might be shut for it coming that direction or anything like that. But all of this is still in play, so important to be watching the weather and watching the trends over the next few days. But yeah, Houston, Galveston, it's certainly going to be better than Beryl, but it's not going to be a complete walk in the park. Some very gusty downpours as those outer bands swing through.
Kelly W., to answer your question real quick, because I do see you asking one last, the winds for Galveston. So being on the weaker side of the system in terms of sustained winds, as those winds flow around the pressure gradient associated with the center of Francine. Remember, we have all these funny names: hurricane, tropical storm, potential tropical cyclone, X, Y, and Z, yada, yada. But in essence, it's simply just another low pressure. Just a very strong and a tightly wound low pressure, and that's where those winds come up as fast as they do. So on the west side of the system, thankfully, you're going against the overall flow that's steering Francine up to the north. That's why the right side of the system is always a little worse and a little stronger, because you're also moving with the environmental flow. Remember, the atmosphere is kind of like a fluid. It's like water. So if you're moving with the current, you're going to go faster. It's like when you go to the airport and you walk on the moving walkways, you're moving a little faster even though you're walking at the same pace. If you try to go against it, you're going slower, obviously. You have to kind of sprint, and even then you're still moving much slower than if you were just walking with it. So thankfully, being on the offshore side of it, you will still have some gusty winds. Those thunderstorms will bring some very strong downbursts, some very strong straight line winds potentially, but not nearly as sustained of impacts. So it'll be a lot more intermittent in nature, and we could still see some localized urban flooding, roadway ponding with those stronger bands, depending on how circular Francine can become over the next 36 hours.
That's exactly right. We're kind of in that wait-and-see mode. Again, we know that it's likely Louisiana this time around for the worst of the impacts, but Houston, Galveston, southeast corner of Texas, we are going to get some of that, and we are going to be watching this closely. With that said, guys, we have been at it for about an hour now. I want to thank you guys a ton for joining the live stream tonight. You guys are awesome. Thanks for bringing the good questions. Sorry we didn't get to every single comment. Again, we're going to try to go back in after if we missed anything. But all of the above, again, hit that subscribe button. We're going to try to do more of these as the week goes on. So if you are interested and you found this live stream helpful, do us a favor, hit that thumbs up button, hit that like button, and we will catch you as we continue to forecast and track the rest of hurricane season. Have a good night, guys. Be safe. What's up, buddy?